Viridian, the Green Guide by My Head in the Clouds, Not Coming Down. Chapter 9. Park Over. Shota had never really understood the appeal of bars. He supposed that Yamada or Shirakumo would probably have dragged him along when they got old enough if they had actually started their own agency, like they'd always planned. But, well, Shota just thought it was irrational to dull his senses with alcohol and loud music when there was work that needed to be done, which was what brought him here, overlooking the bar district while partiers enjoyed the nightlife. Amplifier had only been sick for a day or two, but since the last trigger incident had been in her territory, Shota had asked for her permission to stick around and look for any leads. He had been hanging around for almost 2 weeks, and while he'd managed to find a few small dealers, there hadn't been another major incident. Shota heard Amplifier's voice echoing from a few streets over on each side and started running in that direction. It was probably nothing she couldn't handle, but he might as well lend a hand as long as he didn't have any of his own leads to chase. As he got closer to the fight, however, he almost stopped in shock. He wasn't the only one who had shown up to the fight. Crouching on the roof, eyes glued to the fight below, was Viridian. The kid had a small notebook out, and Shota wondered how he could even see what he was writing in the sparse light. It couldn't be good for his eyes. He could see that the kid's lips were moving as well, so he was probably muttering something, but the words were drowned out by the sound of Amplifier's quirk. The kid had also gotten some more gear, apparently, which alleviated some of Shoto's worries that Viridian wouldn't be able to defend himself. He had added a belt to his costume, which held his tin can and a couple of sticks. Hopefully they were more durable than the ones he had tried to use last time Shota had run into him. There was also a slingshot hanging from one of the loops. Shota nodded in satisfaction. At least the kid had enough sense to cover his long-range defenses. He decided he'd watched long enough, and he should get Viridian to give him an overview of the situation, since he was most likely been the one to lead Amplifier to the fight in the first place. "Does she need any help?" Viridian yelped and clutched his notebook to his chest as he turned around with panic in his eyes. Shota snorted. "Seriously, kid, I would think a vigilante would have more situational awareness. How do you manage to sniff out crime as well as you do, if you couldn't even tell I was behind you?" "Well, Eraserhead, sir, you're one of the most stealth-based heroes out there, and Amplifier's quirk is based on volume. So you probably used her quirk to cover your own approach, unless that's not what you were trying to do. But then again, I guess I was kind of distracted watching the fight and—" Shota rolled his eyes as he went to the edge of the roof and looked down. Amplifier had stopped yelling and seemed to be comforting the victim as the group of thugs were struggling weakly on the ground. "You let her do this one?" Viridian nodded frantically. "The guys were drunk, and I didn't want them hurting that girl because she was alone, and I really didn't like the way they were looking at her and—" Shota cut off the kid's rambling. "Good work, kid." Viridian gave him a bright smile, like Shota had just congratulated him on saving the world rather than just one girl, and practically started vibrating with excitement. "Thank you, Eraserhead, sir." "Like I said before, kid, it's just Eraser." "Oh." Viridian's face fell, and Shota hoped he was just imagining the glimmer of tears behind his goggles. I'm sorry, Eraser." "It's not a big deal, kid." Seriously, he hadn't been expecting Viridian to be so emotional. What was up with the kid? He hadn't actually done anything wrong. Well, he hadn't if Shota ignored the whole vigilante thing. But there was nothing actually wrong with calling him by his full hero name, so why had his simple correction been enough to move the kid to tears? Maybe he should change the subject. "So, what are you writing?" Viridian quickly hid his notebook in one of the pouches on his belt. Nothing." Shota shot him an unimpressed look. "Really, kid? If you're gonna lie, at least come up with a better excuse. Let me see." "It's really nothing." Shota raised one eyebrow. "It's just, my notes are silly and kind of embarrassing," Viridian finally muttered. "It's just some thoughts on the fight so I can figure out what Amplifier was doing and maybe do something similar in the future. I mean, it's nothing special. I know it's kind of creepy." Shota raised an eyebrow at him. "You're learning by example. That's smart. I wish my students had half that drive. Viridian's head snapped up and looked at Shoto with wide eyes. You're a teacher? Shoto snorted. Yeah, I expel brats at UA. Maybe if you actually stayed off the streets, you could actually be in my class in a few years. Viridian looked at the ground and started fidgeting with the sleeves of his hoodie. Do you teach the hero course? Yes, Shoto looked at Viridian curiously. I teach the first years. Then I won't be in your class. Viridian shook his head. I can't be a hero. Why? Bye, Eraser. See you later. Viridian started scrambling down the fire escape even though the roofs were close enough together that it would be easier for him to park over away. Shoto thought fast and wrapped his capture weapon around one of Viridian's wrists. He stopped, and Shoto could feel how hard he was trembling from the way his capture weapon moved. Kid, do you not know parkour? Parkour? Shoto rolled his eyes. Yes, kid. Parkover. You know, running across rooftops without dying. It's pretty essential in this line of work. Viridian had started fidgeting with his sleeves again as soon as Shoto released the tension on his weapon. I don't know. I mean, I guess I've considered it, but I've never really learned, so no. Shoto sighed. Follow me. He made his way down the fire escape, waving to Amplifier as they passed her, and was pleased when he saw that Viridian had actually started following him. He really should start working on finding leads, but it didn't look like anyone else was going to put in the work to make sure the kid didn't die. It didn't take long for him to reach a skate park a few streets over. It was practically abandoned at this time of night, except for a few homeless people and drug dealers. But as long as they left each other alone, Shoto wasn't going to worry about them. He turned around, forcing Viridian to stop quickly to avoid running into him. Alright, first things first. You've got to learn how to fall. I thought the point of parkover was to not fall. Shoto gave him a deadpan glare. No, the point is not to get hurt when you fall. You're always going to fall, especially early on. That's why you have to start small. He gestured to the park. Places like this are a good place to practice early on, because you don't have far to fall. Tonight, though, I'm just going to teach you how to roll. You're gonna teach me? Shoto rolled his eyes. Yes, kid, I'm gonna teach you. Why else would I have you here? Izuku shrugged. To catch me? Shoto sighed again. Not tonight, kid. Little known fact is that we heroes, especially the underground heroes like me, often prefer to work with vigilantes than against them. If you get overly violent or turn to villainy, that'll change pretty quickly. But for right now, we're good. Just don't tell the cops. They're a little more uptight about the whole thing. Alright. Now, like I said, you're always going to fall. Rolling is a good way to make sure that your momentum gets dissipated gradually, so that it doesn't hurt your body. You don't get hurt by moving fast. You get hurt when you suddenly stop moving. That made Viridian chuckle, which Shoto decided to count as a win, considering he'd made the kid cry earlier. We're not gonna start on top of a wall. You're not ready for that right now, but just watch me. Viridian cried out as Shoto dove towards the ground, tucking his arms so that he rolled over his shoulder and landed on his feet. That's a basic roll. Now, let's go slow, and I'll talk you through it. Shoto spent the next couple of hours coaching the kid on some of the basic movements of parkour, and giving him some exercises that would give him a decent foundation. The kid was obviously unused to the movement, but he was a pretty fast learner, all things considered. Occasionally, Viridian would stop to adjust the tools on his belt so that the weight didn't get in his way, or he would take out a notebook and write something down before putting it away again. Shoto couldn't help but be a little curious about it, even though the kid had told him it was nothing. You should take notes on villains too, Shoto said as Viridian reached for his notebook yet again after Shoto had taught him a new move. Taking notes on heroes is good, so you can learn what they do, but knowing what villains do is arguably more important. Viridian finished writing what he was going to and put the notebook back on his belt. But you don't fight repeat villains all the time, and everyone has unique quirks. Why does it matter how a particular villain fights? Think about it, kid. Shoto sat down on one of the low walls and gestured for Viridian to sit next to him. Yeah, you might not ever come across that exact quirk again. But take President Mike and Amplifier. Their quirks might not be identical, but they're similar enough that what works against one might work against another, Viridian said slowly. So, the more I understand different villains' quirks, the more strategies I'll be prepared to fight with. Shoto nodded. At least the problem child was quick on his feet. Not that Shoto didn't already know that, considering he won his first fight with literal garbage. You'll also get better at looking for weaknesses. Right now, because you're trying to emulate heroes, you're actually looking for people's strengths, when you really need to be focusing on their weaknesses. Viridian had pulled his notebook back out and was apparently taking notes on everything Shoto had said. Now he really wished this kid was one of his students. Shoto glanced at his watch and stood. You probably better get to bed, kid. Don't you have school tomorrow? Whatever eagerness Viridian had shown only moments before disappeared as the kid seemed to shrink in on himself, almost like he was trying to make himself a smaller target. Why? Good night, Eraser. Thank you for the help. Sorry for bothering you. He almost stopped the kid from running off again, but by the time he realized Viridian was going to run, he was already around the corner. Damn. He knew the kid was fast, but seriously? He sighed and made his way back to the rooftop. He'd wasted some time, but he couldn't bring himself to regret it. After all, an extra set of boots on the ground couldn't hurt, right?